We shot it in Michigan in September
Okay.
and October, which is like typically pretty cool here. But when you've got lights and people on a small stage and you can't have the air going during takes because of sound, it gets pretty sweaty in there.
Thanks so much for joining me. This is Sean King O'Grady, the director of We Need to Do Something, which came to Blu-ray and DVD on June 16, 2022. It is an isolationist horror film that kind of looks at the world ending and what that might look like if a family was trapped and going stir crazy while craziness was happening outside. It has some really fantastic acting. It has some really, really wonderful practical effects. And thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.
Of course. So I guess the first question is I looked at your background and there's a lot of documentaries. There's a lot of producing in films, but you hadn't directed like a film, or I guess a fiction film, I guess if you want to call it that. So what made you want to jump into this world and jump into this project?
I produced quite a few narrative films, and directing one was something I always had wanted to do. I'd had several that I kind of got close with and never really and ended up going forward. And then when 2020 hit and everything kind of was on pause for a minute, I just used that as an opportunity to kind of reevaluate my life and where things were going and what I wanted to do. And I decided that I was going to make a movie with the resources I had. So it's like, if I have to gather friends and we shoot in this garage that I'd turned into a sound stage and we use my camera, like that's what we're going to do. And I started writing a script that I knew that I could achieve well, and produce well within those confines. And like 2 days into writing that script, my producing partner sent me a different script. I was like, dude, you have to read this. You can do this. It's all in one room. I think you're really going to respond to the themes. I think kind of everybody did, and it wasn't, I guess, so from a production standpoint, it was everything that I was looking to do. From a writing standpoint, than what I had been writing. And it really was, to me, it was the first thing that I felt that captured the way we all felt in those beginning months of the pandemic, where we didn't know what was going to happen. It was the first time in life, in a kind of a global standpoint, everybody has weird personal moments, but from a global point where I couldn't look the people I love in the eye and say, I know everything's going to be okay. And these characters went through that same journey, but at the same point, the movie could really live and could be a story that could apply to anything. It wasn't just a pandemic movie, but I think it really struck a raw nerve because of that. So really, like when Max's script, when I first opened it, it just hit such a raw nerve and really made me excited and felt like something that needed to be made.
Oh, for sure. And I love that, during the pandemic, some people learned to make bread. I kind of got more into interviewing, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to make a movie. I'm going to direct movie and just kind of try that, get out of your comfort zone. I love that idea as well, that you kind of use this opportunity when everyone had some more time to like push yourself. Cause I think a lot of people didn't. And that was one of the reasons why people were going crazy during the pandemic, is people just didn't have anything new. And you kind of like went out there and did it. So I love
Well, the
that.
first 3 months, I didn't do anything new at all. I watched like comfort food movies, which for me were largely horror films, which weirdly made me feel really not as bad about the world outside.
Like, it could be worse. I mean, maybe it'll still get there, but at least from this perspective, it could be worse.
Yeah, I was one of the psychos that watched Contagion like 6 days in, like March 23rd, 2020. I was watching Contagion and it made me feel really good because it ended. I think that's what it was.
Yeah. Well, and this just hasn't ended, so I guess it has that going for it.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, like, why a horror movie, but it sounds like that's just kind of that's one of your jams. That's something that you really love to watch and experience. So I guess that makes perfect sense why you would want to then create a horror movie.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that horror offers catharsis. I think it's exactly that. I think it's seeing the things that the characters go through. I think it's ultimately, confronting the things that we are all afraid of. It's like, I mean, I know there are people out there who say they aren't afraid of death. I think those people are lying. I think that it's the unknown. And I think that horror movies allow us to confront the unknown in a way that that can be irreverent, that can be fun, that can be scary, and that ultimately has an end and we feel better after. I mean, there's all sorts of psychological studies about people who are horror fans, whether it's horror novels, horror movies, whatever, sort of being more psychologically well balanced because they get that darkness out, they work it out, and they're able to, confront their fears in a limited box and deal with it so that it's not dragging around kind of a real ghost that's haunting them as they try to walk through the rest of their lives.
Exactly. And if you could send me those studies so I could send them to my wife so I could say, no, look, I actually am like psychologically balanced. That would probably help me a lot too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm doing this for my mental health.
Exactly. This is a mental health day for me right now. So one of the most important things about this film, other than the cast, because the cast is fantastic, is the location. Like the film takes place in essentially, like you said, one room. It's a very kind of compact space. Where did you find this place? Was it, I mean, did you really just kind of like use what you had? Was this even like your apartment, or did you find a place that that you could just kind of destroy and go crazy in?
We built it in a garage that I converted into a soundstage. And so like when I say I converted it into a soundstage, we like hung furniture pads on the walls and sprayed rubber on the ceiling, and boom, you've got a soundstage. And then the design of it was Amy Williams, our production designer, who's just like absolutely brilliant. And she designed this incredible space where each member of the family can kind of have their own turf. And if you notice also, there's kind of different cubbies, there's different areas. There's lots of Easter eggs too. If someone really wants to take a look at that space, you'll find lots of occult symbols and different things that kind of connect to each character. So really, I know people say this, it can be a cliche, but in the case of this film, our set, our location, absolutely 100% is a character in the film.
That is awesome. And I do love the idea that it was built in a garage. I imagine maybe it wasn't climate controlled, so that probably contributed to the realistic aspect of them being trapped here and having no idea what was going to happen and kind of going stir crazy. I'm not sure if I'm not sure how hot it was in there.
Yeah, we shot it in Michigan in September and October, which is like typically pretty cool here. But when you've got lights and people on a small stage and you can't have the air going during takes because of sound, it gets pretty sweaty in there. And it was just a wild experience. So it was actually like the claustrophobia that we had on set was enhanced because we had to really create like a bubble during production, because at that point the protocols for producing during COVID were different. And it like any COVID positive was just like a total shutdown. So we had to be really careful. And the garage that we made the soundstage shared a parking lot with a hotel. So all the cast and crew moved into the hotel. We stayed in the hotel. We would walk across in the morning before the sun was up to the stage. We would get on the stage, we'd work all day. We would leave at night and go to the hotel after the sun had set, and then we couldn't hang out with each other. So it was really like you go from your hotel room, you walk across this parking lot, you go onto this sound stage, you don't see the sun all day, and then you go back and do the same thing every day. So it's really the crew got to have a similar experience to, I mean, obviously a lot more comfortable and with, less demonic entities involved.
Hopefully less animals too, but who knows how much
yeah,
the hotel it was.
Yeah, and at least the snakes in Michigan aren't venomous, so you don't have to worry about that. But yeah, we got to have a similar experience in that it was very claustrophobic. And when we shot the flashback sequences on the last 2 days, and it felt like making a different movie, and it felt like this celebration of like, wow, we get to see sunlight, and like even if the family doesn't get out of this bathroom, we get out. Yeah. And so that was pretty liberating.
And that is, that's a good point about, the protocols and all of that, because this was filmed earlier in the pandemic. So like the uncertainty that the cast felt might have also been uncertainty for you all, because we didn't really know, like there probably wasn't a vaccine at that point, like some of how the transmission happened and safe protocols were still kind of being made. So this is that kind of adds to the tension that was probably inherent in making this film.
Yeah, for sure. It was like, I will call it like deep hand sanitizer days when everyone was still like, wiping down doorknobs and doing that. So it was like pretty paranoid atmosphere, really, when it came to COVID, and everybody was pretty concerned about it. But the flip side of that is that, with the exception of Vinessa Shaw, who had done one project right before ours, nobody had worked. The cast and the crew hadn't worked in like 9 months. And we were all or 6, 7 months, something, a lot of months.
Yeah.
We were all really excited to get back together, and making a film is like, I don't know, it's like you're like a little troop of people that are getting together to collectively make this piece of art that you all believe in. And to not have that for so long, and then finally get to do it again, even though it was under these really strange conditions, it really felt like being home again. And so everybody was really excited and came at it with a real sense of purpose and fun.
Yeah, for sure. I've talked to a lot of people that braved it and made films during the pandemic, and everyone, to a T, has said it was just nice to be out there and working and like seeing people and interacting, because it was so difficult to kind of create bubbles and make sure that those bubbles were safe. But if you have like a project and a shared vision, everyone is going to kind of make sure that that bubble is maintained, so you can work and interact safely. So that's great to hear. Even though you're making a not super happy movie, at least the set was happy.
Yeah. Yeah, and horror movies are fun too. There's moments, there's pretty deep emotional moments in our film, and those can be tough when you watch actors who are really good perform them. You really feel for them. And but then there's also like anything that we were doing, like a lot of the effects in the movie were practical, as you noted, and that stuff is so much fun. Like when you're in a room with a snake puppeteer and you get to see what it looks like. We have some behind the scenes photos of you see like you see our amazing snake team is Dan Reber and his team. They're with these rods in this tiny room, and you've got 4 family members, and we've got the whole camera team, and everybody's just crammed into this little area. It looks so different from what you end up seeing on screen, and each one of those takes, everybody's just laughing hysterically at the end because it's so much fun.
That is awesome. And yeah, that's a good point to talk about the practical effects. I love that you went with practical effects. As a horror fan, I imagine maybe you like practical effects more, or maybe that was just what was within the budget. Like, what was the decision to kind of make sure that you were going to use practical effects in this small production that you made?
It actually would have been less expensive to use mostly visual effects. But from the beginning, Dan Reber, who I mentioned, who did all the practical effects, and he and I talked a lot about Cronenberg and what we loved about, especially like his body horror films. And there's a little of that in this movie as well. But really, I think there's something in today's world. There was so long. I'll go back a little. There was so long where you knew every effect was practical, and it was just trying to make it look as real as possible. And then the tide kind of changed, and for the 90s and the 2000s, you just knew every effect was VFX. It was all done in post. And now we're at this weird place where you can kind of make the audience wonder again, whether it's practical effects, whether it's visual effects, whether it's some combination of the two. Is it a real snake? The audience might wonder that. Like, you really can keep the audience guessing. And so that was, for us from the beginning, we thought that it was cool to trick the audience and mess with their expectations, especially on such a low budget film. And from a performance standpoint, it is, despite all the crew being in the room, when an actor has an actual snake that they're looking at that they can act to, that really helps them. Like, they all really loved it. It's a lot easier than, the tennis ball at the end of a golf club that everybody's used to at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And effects are kind of like one of my pet peeves. Like, if CG can be done well, but in my mind, it has to be very expensive to be done well. And so if you see something like that kind of breaks your suspension of disbelief, it really kind of pulls me out of a movie. So seeing the practical effects, I actually was wondering if there was some of them were clearly like a snake being manipulated, but I wasn't sure if there was actually like a snake that was also used in some scenes, because it looked very realistic.
Yeah, no real snakes. That's just what you have, a brilliant snake maker and puppeteer to pull that off. It's pretty incredible to watch.
And did the snake make appearances, I don't know, in like cast members' hotel rooms, things like that? Any fun snake antics that happened?
No, I think everybody has a few photos with the snake, but there were no snake pranks, unfortunately.
I guess, small crew, you had to make sure everyone stayed healthy. You didn't want someone to hurt themselves running from a snake and then have to shut down production. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Snake puppet induced heart attack.
Yeah, there you go.
A bad way to go out.
And you would not want to have gone to the hospital at that time too. So it makes perfect sense then as
Definitely
well.
not.
And speaking of the cast, I love the cast. I thought that they all did a really great job, and they all kind of like gave it their all. How did you find them? I mean, it's such an interesting group of characters, and I especially loved Pat Healy just kind of like going bonkers during this film. So how did you find everyone in this?
It was honestly like it came together really kind of like magic. It was we got everybody that we wanted. You know, I had worked with Pat previously on a film called Dinner in America, which is a very different movie. It's a comedy, but Pat was just amazing in it. And he, I think it was actually my producing partner, Bill, who first brought up when we started talking about casting Robert. He's like, what about Pat Healy? And we sent it to Pat and he just loved it and thought we could dive into it and really help with the character development. And then for Melissa, we were really struggling to think of who we would want to do that role, because there's really a lot of heavy lifting that has to be done. Mm-hmm. And then Max Booth, the screenwriter, he's like, hey, have you ever seen this movie, The Vast of Night? And we watched that, and Sierra's just incredible in it. And I happen to know her manager, and so sent it to her, and it all happened like really quickly. And like Vinessa was the same thing. And so the only two roles that we really had to like do any outreach on or get, like, I personally don't really like seeing actors on tape. I don't like having them audition. I like to see, you know, I'd like to have a conversation with them. Like, can you bring to this kid? Like, I don't want to see your impersonation. I want to hear what you're going to bring to the character. But for Amy and for the son in the film, we needed to get people on tape. And it was really crazy because we were struggling to figure out what the character of Amy was exactly. And we saw all these tapes, and every tape was like, that's not Amy. That's not Amy. And then Lisette, who ended up playing Amy, she delivered a tape. We couldn't get it out of our head. We were like, this is the character. She absolutely nailed it on her first try. Well, it wasn't her first try, but what we saw of her first try, if it was her first, that's even more impressive. But no, it was crazy. It was just like when you see somebody who embodies a character, she became the character. And that's then the same thing with John James Cronin. He just nailed Bobby. He just like looked like such a great movie kid. And so that was, you know, our two cool experiences of casting people off of just wide kind of casting search.
That's awesome. And possibly the most famous cast member, I was excited to see his name on this, was Ozzy, who did the voice of the dog. Like, how did that work out? Like,
man, that was lightning in a bottle. I still kind of pinch myself that we actually were able to get Ozzy to show up as the voice of, like, who else other than like the Prince of Darkness should be doing that voice from the outside, or one voice from the outside. So that was really exciting and really cool. And that was just one of our executive producers like knew Ozzy.
That's such an awesome little Easter egg, because I don't think half the people who've watched this film will probably catch it. But then also, like, it almost makes me want more Ozzy in this film. Like, I wish there could have been more crazy to get them. But that was such a cool little callback in there that I'm really happy.
I wish the long takes that I have, I've got like probably 30 minutes of audio of Ozzy doing different voices and trying different things. And it's absolute gold. Like, I don't know what it would take from like a right standpoint for me to be able to like release all of that. But if anyone out there is an Ozzy fan who like me would like to listen to that, it's some of the best like 25-30 minutes of audio that you could ever listen to.
That sounds awesome. And I really hope there's a way you can figure out to get that as an additional special feature, maybe in like a second re-release, because that would be amazing to hear.
Yeah, I need to work on that.
So awesome. So speaking of the release, the film is We Need to Do Something. It came out on DVD and Blu-ray on June 16th, 2022. You are out promoting the film. You're trying to get the word out, making sure people see this, indie pandemic project. But I assume you have other projects on the horizon. After people check this out, what else can they look forward to seeing from you in the near future? Any more movies, or are you going back to documentaries?
Yeah, I just finished a documentary recently, and then I've got another film that we start shooting pretty quickly here. So I'll have something to share shortly.
Oh, nice. Another narrative film?
Correct.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining me. Thanks for that little tidbit. This is Sean King O'Grady, the director of We Need to Do Something. Like I said, it came out on Blu-ray and DVD on June 16th, 2022. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, David. Really appreciate it.